In the peaceful farming town of Oakhollow, nestled between rolling hills and ancient forests, a simple afternoon at a farmer's market was about to expose a truth that had been hidden for decades. Emma Collins was just another farmer's daughter, tending to her father's organic produce stand, when the thundering engines of the Steel Serpents motorcycle gang shattered their tranquil Saturday market. What those bikers didn't know, what nobody in town knew, was that the quiet, unassuming farmer they were about to confront had spent 15 years as an elite special forces operator. They say the deadliest predators are the ones that don't need to advertise their strength. On that fateful day, a group of arrogant bikers would learn this lesson the hard way, discovering that true power lies not in the ability to intimidate, but in knowing when and how to use the strength you possess. This is the story of how a father's hidden past protected his daughter's future, how a gang of troubled souls found redemption in the most unexpected place, and how one small town discovered that its quietest resident was also its most formidable protector. Let's take a quick break. Tell us where you're tuning in from. If this kind of content speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is something truly special. Morning dew still clung to the fresh vegetables as Emma Collins arranged the produce display at her father's market stand. The early summer sun cast long shadows across the marketplace, where local vendors were setting up their stalls for what promised to be another busy Saturday. At 22, Emma moved with practiced efficiency, her honey blonde hair tied back in a practical ponytail, her keen green eyes checking every detail of the presentation. "The tomatoes are particularly good this week," she called out to Mrs. Henderson, who had been their first customer every Saturday for as long as Emma could remember. The elderly woman smiled, picking up one of the rich red fruits and examining it with expert eyes. "Your father always did have a way with tomatoes," Mrs. Henderson replied, adding several to her basket. "How is David doing? I haven't seen him this morning." Emma carefully adjusted a basket of fresh herbs before answering. "He's back at the farm, fixing the irrigation system. Said he'd join me later." She didn't mention how distracted her father had seemed lately, or the mysterious phone call she'd overheard last night, another in a long series of strange moments she'd learned to ignore over the years. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm, a steady stream of regular customers mixing with summer tourists who had discovered Oakhollow's charm. Emma found comfort in the familiar routine, weighing produce, making change, sharing recipe tips with customers. The market had been her second home since childhood, when she would help her father sort vegetables while dreaming of the day she'd go off to graduate school. David Collins arrived just before noon, moving through the crowd with that distinctive walk Emma had never seen in another farmer. Smooth, controlled, aware. He carried 2 heavy crates of fresh produce as if they weighed nothing, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile at the sight of his daughter. "Looks like you've got everything under control here," he said, setting down the crates and surveying the half-empty displays with approval. "Almost sold out of everything," Emma confirmed. "Though we might need more bell peppers next week. The restaurant owners have been buying them up." David nodded, but Emma noticed his attention had shifted slightly, his eyes scanning the marketplace in that peculiar way he sometimes had, as if he were checking for something more than just potential customers. She'd seen this behavior before, at her high school graduation, at crowded festivals, even at the grocery store. It was just another of her father's quirks, like the locked footlocker in the barn, or the way he could appear silently behind you when you least expected it. The peaceful atmosphere of the market shattered with the distant rumble of motorcycles. At first, it was just a low thunder that could have been a summer storm rolling in from the mountains. But the sound grew louder, more aggressive, until it dominated the marketplace. Conversations stopped, heads turned. Parents instinctively drew their children closer. Emma watched as her father's posture changed subtly. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but she'd grown up studying his every move, trying to understand the mysteries behind his quiet demeanor. His shoulders squared ever so slightly, his stance shifted, and his eyes, those kind eyes that had watched her grow up, took on a hardness she'd only glimpsed in rare, unguarded moments. The motorcycles appeared at the market entrance, 5 of them at first, then more, until a dozen gleaming machines lined up like metal predators. Their riders were a stark contrast to the market's usual clientele, leather-clad figures adorned with patches declaring them members of the Steel Serpents. Their leader, a tall man with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, swung off his bike with practiced arrogance. "Well, well," he announced, his voice carrying across the now silent marketplace. "Ain't this just the sweetest little setup?" His eyes roamed the stalls before settling on Emma's stand, and Emma herself. Especially sweet indeed. David Collins stood perfectly still, watching. But Emma noticed his hands. Those strong farmer's hands that had taught her to plant seeds and build fences were completely steady. Too steady, perhaps, for a simple farmer facing a gang of bikers. The leader strode toward their stand, his boots striking the pavement with deliberate force. Two of his companions flanked him, while others began to spread out through the market. Customers quickly stepped aside, creating a clear path to Emma's stand. "Name's Max," the leader announced, coming to a stop in front of Emma. "Though most folks call me Viper." He picked up a tomato, tossing it carelessly from hand to hand. "What's a pretty thing like you doing out here in the sticks?" Emma stood her ground, drawing on years of watching her father's quiet strength. "I'm working," she replied firmly. "That tomato is $2. Max's smile didn't reach his eyes. $2? That's highway robbery, darling." He let the tomato drop, watching it splat against the pavement. Behind him, his companions chuckled. David Collins hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but something in the air had changed. Later, Emma would remember this as the moment she first truly sensed the other side of her father, the part of him that had nothing to do with farming. "Sir," David said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly, "I'm going to have to ask you to pay for that tomato." The marketplace held its breath. Max turned slowly, taking in David's appearance. The flannel shirt, the worn jeans, the dirt under his fingernails. Everything about him screamed farmer, and yet there was something in his stance that made Max pause just for a moment. But the moment passed, and Max's arrogance returned. "Or what, old man? You gonna make me?" He stepped closer to David, using his height advantage to loom over him. "Maybe you don't know who we are. Maybe you need a lesson in respect." David's reply was so soft that only Emma and Max could hear it. "Maybe you need a lesson in manners." The words themselves were simple, but something in how they were delivered, the tone, the certainty, the complete lack of fear, made Emma's spine tingle. She'd heard those words before, hadn't she? In one of those half-remembered moments from her childhood, when strange men in uniform would sometimes visit the farm, speaking to her father in hushed tones. As the tension mounted and the summer sun beat down on the marketplace, Emma realized she was witnessing the beginning of something. The first crack in the facade that had hidden her father's true nature for all these years. And as Max's face darkened with anger, as his companions moved to surround their stand, as the peaceful Saturday market teetered on the edge of violence, Emma Collins began to understand that she had never really known her father at all. The tension in the marketplace crystallized as Max's fellow Steel Serpents closed ranks around David Collins' produce stand. Shoppers retreated further, creating an even wider circle around the confrontation. The summer air grew thick with anticipation, broken only by the occasional rumble of idling motorcycles at the market's entrance. Emma watched her father's face, searching for any sign of fear or uncertainty. There was none. Instead, she saw something entirely different emerging in his expression. A calculated awareness that seemed to take in everything at once. His eyes tracked each biker's movement with precision that seemed beyond casual observation. "Last chance to apologize, old man," Max growled, his snake tattoo seeming to writhe as he clenched his jaw. "On your knees, and maybe we just trash your stand instead of you." David's response was to slowly wipe his hands on his jeans, as if preparing for work. The gesture seemed ordinary enough, but Emma noticed how it left his arms loose, ready. "I think," he said calmly, "that you boys might want to reconsider your choices here." A biker with a scraggly beard and razor patched on his vest stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Choices? Only choice I see is whether we mess you up before or after we teach your daughter some manners." The change in David's demeanor was subtle but profound. His eyes hardened to steel, and suddenly he seemed to occupy more space without moving an inch. When he spoke again, his voice carried an authority that Emma had never heard before. "That was your second mistake," David said. "Your first was dropping that tomato, but threatening my daughter?" He shook his head slowly. "That's not something you get to walk away from." Max laughed, but there was a note of uncertainty in it now. "There's 12 of us, farmer. What exactly do you think you're going to do?" "Dad," Emma said softly, worry creeping into her voice. She'd seen her father handle aggressive customers before, but this was different. These men were dangerous, and there were so many of them. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. David glanced at his daughter, and for a moment his expression softened. "It's all right, Emma. Some men just need to learn the hard way." He turned back to Max. "You have 10 seconds to get on your bikes and leave. After that, I stop being polite." The marketplace had gone completely silent. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. Emma could hear her own heartbeat counting down those 10 seconds as Max's face twisted with rage. "Get him!" Max snarled. Razor moved first, throwing a heavy punch at David's head. What happened next would forever change how Emma saw her father. David's movement was so smooth it seemed almost casual. A slight shift of weight, a minimal turn of his body, and Razor's fist hit nothing but air. Before the biker could recover his balance, David's hand clamped onto his extended arm, and with a movement too quick to follow, Razor was suddenly airborne. The biker crashed into 2 of his companions, sending all 3 sprawling into a nearby empty stall. David hadn't even seemed to exert himself. He simply returned to his relaxed stance, though now Emma could see it for what it was. Not the posture of a farmer, but of a trained fighter. 9 seconds left, David announced calmly. Max's face had lost some of its color. "What the hell are you?" 2 more bikers rushed forward together. David moved like water, each gesture efficient and purposeful. One biker was redirected into a face-first meeting with a wooden post, while the other found himself suddenly unable to breathe, doubled over after a precise strike to his solar plexus. "The thing about fighting," David said conversationally, stepping over a groaning biker, "is that it's not about size or numbers. It's about training, discipline, control." Each word was punctuated by another biker hitting the ground. "Things they taught us extensively in Special Forces." The revelation hit Emma like a thunderbolt. Special Forces. Suddenly, 1,000 little moments from her childhood clicked into place. The perfect posture, the awareness, the mysterious visitors, the locked footlocker in the barn. Her father, the quiet farmer who could fix anything and grew the best tomatoes in 3 counties, had been a Special Forces operator. Max's swagger had completely evaporated. Half his crew was already on the ground, and David Collins hadn't even broken a sweat. "You're military?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Was," David corrected. 15 years Special Forces, retired now. Just want to grow my vegetables and live in peace." His eyes narrowed. "Which is why I'm giving you one last chance to leave." The remaining bikers looked to Max for direction, their earlier confidence shattered. Max himself seemed frozen, his worldview visibly crumbling as he processed what he was seeing. The tough guys who'd rolled into town looking for easy targets had instead found themselves facing something far beyond their experience. "Look, man," Max began, raising his hands. "We didn't know." "Clearly," David interrupted. "But now you do. So make your choice." 3 seconds left. Emma watched in amazement as the mighty Steel Serpents, who had roared into their peaceful market with such bravado, began backing away. Max was the last to move, his face a mixture of fear and something else, perhaps respect or recognition. As the bikers retreated to their motorcycles, David turned to the overturned produce. With the same efficient movement he'd used to disable the attackers, he began setting things right. Emma joined him, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up scattered vegetables. "Dad," she said quietly, "were you ever going to tell me?" David paused, looking at his daughter with a complex mixture of emotions. "I wanted you to have a normal life, Emma. To grow up without the weight of all that. But all these years, I'm still the same person," he assured her. "Still your father, still a farmer. The rest..." He gestured to the marketplace where onlookers were beginning to emerge from their hiding places. "That was another life. One I left behind." The sound of motorcycles roaring to life filled the air. The Steel Serpents were leaving, their earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching a retreat. But as they pulled away, Emma noticed Max looking back, his expression thoughtful. Something told her this wouldn't be the last they'd see of the Steel Serpents. As the market slowly returned to life around them, Emma saw her father in a new light. The way he moved, the way he carried himself, it had always been there, hiding in plain sight. She had 1,000 questions, but for now, she simply helped him restore order to their stand, watching as he seamlessly returned to being just a farmer again. But now she knew better. Now she understood that sometimes the quietest people had the most extraordinary stories to tell. And as customers cautiously returned to their stand, whispering among themselves about what they'd witnessed, Emma realized this was just the beginning of a much larger story. One that would change not only her understanding of her father, but the entire town of Oakhollow itself. The drive home from the market that evening was heavy with unspoken questions. Emma watched the familiar landscape of Oakhollow roll past. The weathered barn doors, the old Miller place with its crooked mailbox, the covered bridge that had survived 3 floods. But everything looked different now, as if her father's revelation had changed not just him, but the entire world around them. David drove with the same quiet confidence he did everything else, one hand resting loosely on the steering wheel of their old pickup truck. The truck bed was unusually empty. Most of their produce had been damaged in the confrontation, and what remained they'd given away to help clean up the market. "You're wondering about Afghanistan," David said, finally breaking the silence. Emma turned to him, startled. "How did you..." "The photos in the barn." He kept his eyes on the road, but a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I saw you finding them last week, the one of the team in Kandahar." "I thought they were from some military history book," Emma admitted. "I never imagined..." She paused, gathering her thoughts. 15 years, Dad. That's almost my entire life." David nodded, turning onto the gravel road that led to their farm. "I left the service when your mother died. You were 7. Decided you needed a father more than the country needed another soldier." The mention of her mother made Emma's chest tighten. Sarah Collins had died from an unexpected aneurysm, leaving behind a devastated husband and a confused little girl. Now Emma wondered how many of her memories needed to be re-examined in light of this new knowledge. "Those men who used to visit," she said slowly. "The ones in uniform who'd come late at night. They weren't agricultural inspectors, were they?" David's laugh was soft but genuine. "No, former teammates mostly. Keeping in touch, checking in, making sure I was adjusting to civilian life." He pulled the truck up to their farmhouse, killing the engine. "It wasn't easy at first. Farming was your grandfather's life, not mine. But I learned. For you." Emma sat in the truck even after her father got out, watching him walk around to unload the few empty crates. His movements, which had always seemed just slightly too precise for a farmer, now made perfect sense. She had grown up watching a warrior pretend to be a farmer, and he had played the role so well she had never questioned it. The sound of approaching motorcycles made them both turn. For a moment, tension returned to David's shoulders, but this time it was just old Mr. Peterson on his ancient Harley, puttering past their property as he did every evening. Still, Emma noticed how her father tracked the sound until it faded away. "Are they going to come back?" she asked, finally climbing out of the truck. "The Steel Serpents?" David considered this as they walked toward the house. "Possibly. Men like that. Their pride gets wounded. They sometimes do stupid things. But they might surprise us." He paused at the porch steps. "People can change, Emma. I did." Inside the farmhouse, everything looked exactly as it had that morning, yet somehow different. The row of medals in the study that Emma had always assumed were her grandfather's agricultural awards. Had they always been military honors? The precise way the kitchen knives were arranged, the emergency kit under the sink that was far more comprehensive than any farmer would need. "I need to show you something," David said, heading toward the barn. Emma followed, her heart beating faster. The barn had always been partially off-limits, not forbidden exactly, but her father had made it clear that certain areas were private. The evening light filtered through the barn's wooden slats as David approached the locked footlocker that had fascinated Emma throughout her childhood. She had always imagined it contained old farming documents or family photographs. Now she knew better. David knelt before the footlocker, his fingers moving surely over the combination lock. "If trouble comes," he said quietly, "you need to know what's in here, how to use it if necessary." The lock clicked open, and Emma held her breath as her father lifted the lid. Inside, she saw a world that belonged more to action movies than to their quiet farm. Communication equipment, documents in multiple languages, and what appeared to be several passports. "This isn't just about today, is it?" Emma asked, beginning to understand. "You've been preparing for something like this all along." David carefully lifted out a small black case. "In my line of work, my former line of work, you learn that peace is precious precisely because it's fragile. Being prepared isn't paranoia, it's responsibility." He opened the case, revealing a satellite phone. "There are numbers in here. People who owe me favors. People who would come if we needed them." Emma sank onto a nearby hay bale, overwhelmed. "All these years I thought you were just being overprotective. The self-defense classes, the situational awareness games you taught me. They weren't games," David said gently. "They were training. I couldn't tell you everything, but I could prepare you, give you tools to stay safe." A sudden rustling outside the barn made them both turn. David's movement was subtle but immediate, placing himself between Emma and the door. But it was only their barn cat, Soldier, a name that now seemed far less random, chasing a field mouse through the gathering dusk. "The market will be different now," Emma said, watching her father relax. "People saw what you can do. They'll talk." David began carefully repacking the footlocker. "Let them talk. Small towns run on gossip, but they also understand keeping secrets, especially when those secrets protect them." He smiled slightly. "Did you notice how Mrs. Henderson didn't seem surprised at all?" Emma thought back to the market, to the aftermath of the confrontation. Now that she mentioned it, some of the older residents had seemed less shocked than others. "How many people know?" "A few. The sheriff, Doc Matthews, some of the original families who were here when I first moved back." He closed the footlocker, the lock clicking with finality. "Oakhollow takes care of its own, Emma. Always has." As they walked back to the house in the fading light, Emma saw movement at the edge of their property. A motorcycle, barely visible through the trees, idling for a moment before moving on. She tensed, but her father seemed unconcerned. "Max," David said simply. "Watching. Thinking." "Should we be worried?" David shook his head. "He's not here to cause trouble. Not tonight. He's trying to figure out who he picked a fight with, what it means." He looked at his daughter with pride. "You stood your ground today. Showed real courage." "I learned from you," Emma replied. Then after a moment, "Are there more secrets, Dad?" The screen door creaked as they entered the house, the familiar smell of home wrapping around them. David Collins, farmer, father, former Special Forces operator, looked at his daughter with a mixture of love and resignation. "There are always more secrets, Emma. The question is whether we're ready for them." He headed toward the kitchen, where dinner preparations awaited. "But for now, let's just focus on what to do with all those bruised tomatoes." As Emma watched her father move around the kitchen with his usual efficiency, she realized that while everything had changed today, nothing had changed at all. He was still her father, still the man who had raised her, taught her, protected her. The only difference was that now she was beginning to understand just how deep that protection went and what it might cost them both in the days to come. Sunday morning dawned over Oakhollow with an air of anticipation. News of yesterday's events at the farmers market had spread through the town like wildfire, transforming David Collins from a quiet farmer into something of a local legend overnight. The morning church service buzzed with whispered conversations and sidelong glances at the Collins' usual pew, conspicuously empty this week. Instead of attending service, David and Emma were at their farm, assessing the damage to their produce and planning for the next market day. The morning air was crisp, heavy with the scent of recent rain and fresh-turned earth. Emma watched her father examine their tomato plants with the same careful attention he'd shown during yesterday's confrontation. "These will need another week," he said, gently turning a green tomato in his calloused hands. Then, without looking up, "We've got company." Emma heard the motorcycle engines a full 30 seconds later, approaching from the main road. Her father's enhanced awareness was something she now noticed constantly, like a radio frequency she'd finally tuned into. The sounds grew louder, but different from yesterday. Fewer engines, moving more slowly. 3 motorcycles appeared at the end of their driveway. Emma recognized Max's distinctive bike in the lead, but the aggressive rumble of their engines had been replaced with a more respectful purr. David straightened slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, though his tone suggested he didn't expect trouble. Max killed his engine first, the other 2 riders following suit. The morning silence returned, broken only by distant birdsong and the gentle rustle of corn leaves in the breeze. The Steel Serpents leader dismounted, his movements deliberately non-threatening. Emma noticed he'd left his leather jacket behind, wearing just a plain black t-shirt that made him look somehow younger, more vulnerable. "Mr. Collins," Max called out, keeping his distance. "Got a minute to talk?" David studied the 3 men for a long moment before nodding. "Emma, why don't you get our guests some water? It's going to be a hot day." Emma hesitated only briefly before heading to the house. Through the kitchen window, she watched her father and the bikers engage in what appeared to be a civil conversation. By the time she returned with a pitcher of water and some glasses, the tension had noticeably eased. "Served under Captain Collins in Kandahar," one of Max's companions was saying. He was older than the others, with gray streaking his beard. "My brother Tommy. He used to write home about his CO, said he was the kind of leader who'd never ask his men to do something he wouldn't do himself." David's expression softened slightly. "Tommy Richards. Good soldier. Saved our whole unit in the Korengal Valley." "He didn't make it home," the older biker said quietly. "But he wrote me one last letter. Told me if I ever needed help to find his Captain Collins. Said you'd moved back to your family farm somewhere in these parts." He shook his head. "Never thought I'd find you like this, though. Name's Jack. Tommy was my little brother." Emma set the water down on a nearby garden table, watching the dynamics shift. Her father's posture had changed, taking on that military bearing she now recognized. "Tommy was a hero," David said. "Saved more lives than he ever knew. He poured water for everyone, the simple act of hospitality bridging the gap between yesterday's adversaries. But I'm guessing you didn't come here just to reminisce." Max stepped forward, accepting a glass of water with a nod of thanks. "We came to apologize. What happened yesterday, that's not who we're trying to be. The Steel Serpents started as a veterans support group, if you can believe it. Somewhere along the way we lost sight of that. Started running protection rackets," Jack added, his tone disgusted. "Scaring honest folks. Tommy would have been ashamed of what we've become." David leaned against the garden table, his farmer's outfit incongruous with his military bearing. "It's never too late to change course, to remember who you were meant to be. That's why we're here," Max said. "After what happened yesterday, after learning who you are. The boys and I had a long talk last night. We want to make things right. Not just with you and your daughter, but with the whole town." Emma watched her father carefully consider this. She could almost see him processing the tactical implications, weighing sincerity against risk, just as he must have done countless times in his former life. "Making things right isn't just about words," David said finally. It's about actions, consistent choices over time. We know, Max replied. That's why we're hoping you might help us. Guide us back to what we should have been all along. He gestured to Jack. Some of our members are veterans, like Jack here. Others are just lost souls looking for purpose. Maybe what we need is someone who understands both worlds. The morning sun had risen higher, casting long shadows from the cornfield across the gathered group. Emma saw something in her father's eyes that she recognized from her childhood. The same look he'd had when teaching her to ride a bike, to grow vegetables, to stand up for herself. The look of someone who saw potential where others might see only problems. It won't be easy, David warned. Changing course never is. The town won't trust you overnight. We're willing to work for it, Max said, to earn that trust back. We've already talked to Sheriff Morgan about helping with the town's summer security patrol. Figure it's a start. David nodded slowly. It's a good start, but there's something else you need to do first. He turned to Emma. The market vendors who lost produce yesterday because of your actions, they need to be made whole. Already working on that too, Jack said. Passed the hat last night. Got enough to cover the damages and then some. Was hoping you could help us distribute it. Coming from you, it might mean more. Emma saw her father's subtle smile, the one he usually reserved for when a particularly challenging crop finally took root. Tell you what, he said. Help us salvage what we can of today's harvest, and we'll talk more about next steps. And so, as the Sunday morning church service led out in town, anyone driving past the Collins farm would have seen an unusual sight. 3 Steel Serpents members, their motorcycles parked respectfully by the barn, working alongside David and Emma in the vegetable fields. Their leather vests looked out of place among the corn stalks, but their efforts were sincere. As they worked, Emma noticed how naturally her father shifted between farmer and mentor, offering guidance on both proper harvesting techniques and deeper life lessons. The men responded to his quiet authority just as she had always done, finding comfort in his steady presence and clear direction. By noon, when the sun was high and the morning's work was done, something had fundamentally shifted. The Steel Serpents who rode away from the Collins farm were not the same men who had arrived, and Oakhollow, Emma realized, was about to witness a transformation that would touch far more lives than just their own. The next Saturday market dawned differently than any before. Emma arrived early to set up their stand, only to find the Steel Serpents already there, helping other vendors unload their trucks and set up their stalls. The sight of leather-clad bikers carefully arranging flower displays and carrying crates of fresh produce drew curious stares from the townspeople. Max and Jack worked methodically, going from vendor to vendor with envelopes containing compensation for last week's damages. Emma noticed how they spoke with quiet respect, accepting the mixed reactions they received, some grateful, others still wary. At each stop, they mentioned David Collins's name, and that seemed to ease the tension somewhat. Quite a change from last week, Mrs. Henderson observed, approaching Emma's stand. The elderly woman watched as a young Steel Serpent member helped Mr. Patterson set up his honey display. Your father's handiwork, I assume. Emma arranged tomatoes while considering her response. They want to make things right. Dad's helping them find their way back. He always did have a gift for that, Mrs. Henderson said cryptically. At Emma's questioning look, she continued. Oh, I knew your father back when he first returned to Oakhollow, after your mother's passing. He was different then. Lost, maybe. The farm helped him find his path again. Before Emma could probe further, David arrived with fresh produce from the farm. 2 Steel Serpents immediately stepped forward to help unload, treating him with a deference that reminded Emma of old war movies she'd seen, soldiers reporting to a respected commander. The irrigation system's fixed at the Wilson place, one of them reported quietly. Took some doing, but we got it sorted. David nodded approvingly. Good work. Make sure you document the hours for Sheriff Morgan. He turned to Emma. The Serpents have been helping with odd jobs around town, building up trust. Throughout the morning, Emma watched the fascinating dance unfold. The Steel Serpents had stationed themselves strategically around the market, alert but not threatening. When a group of rowdy teenagers started causing trouble near the craft stalls, Max quietly intervened, his presence alone enough to restore order. "Your father's teaching them more than just community service," observed Reverend Matthews, who had stopped by for his weekly produce. "He's teaching them purpose." Emma saw it too. The way the Serpents carried themselves had changed. Less swagger, more confidence. They moved with something of her father's awareness, watching out for the community rather than trying to intimidate it. Near noon, a distant rumble of motorcycles caused heads to turn. David straightened slightly, but Max stepped forward. "That'll be the Red Devils," he said grimly. "They sometimes come through here looking for trouble. Used to be we'd join them." The rival gang appeared at the market entrance, a dozen bikes strong. Their leader, a massive man with a red bandana, surveyed the scene with obvious surprise, taking in the Steel Serpents' new role. David moved with casual purpose toward the entrance, Max and Jack flanking him naturally. Emma followed, close enough to hear but hanging back as her father had taught her. "Market's under protection," Max called out to the Red Devils. "Suggest you move along." The rival leader laughed. "Protection? You gone soft, Viper? Playing security guard for farmers now?" "Not security guards," David said quietly, stepping forward. "Community members." His stance was relaxed but ready, and Emma recognized it from last week. "And this community doesn't need any trouble." The Red Devils leader studied David, obviously noting the way the Steel Serpents deferred to him. Something in David's bearing must have registered, the unmistakable presence of someone who knew exactly how much damage they could do and chose not to. "Heard about what happened to Snake's crew over in Millbrook when they pushed too hard," one of the Red Devils muttered to their leader. "Whole gang ended up in traction, somebody ex-military." Understanding dawned in the leader's eyes. He gunned his engine, trying to save face. "Market's no fun anyway. Boys, let's ride." As the Red Devils roared away, Emma saw the impact of the moment on the watching crowd. The Steel Serpents hadn't resorted to threats or violence. They'd stood their ground alongside David, protecting rather than intimidating. "That's how it's done," David said quietly to Max. "Power isn't about making people fear you. It's about standing for something worth protecting." Later, as the market wound down, Emma overheard snippets of conversation among the vendors. The initial skepticism about the Steel Serpents' transformation was giving way to cautious acceptance. She watched her father working with them, his guidance subtle but constant. "Your father's building something here," Jack said, helping Emma pack up unsold produce. Something Tommy would have been proud of. He always said Captain Collins could make soldiers out of anyone willing to learn. Emma thought about the footlocker in their barn, about all the secrets still waiting to be revealed. "Do you think the Red Devils will be back?" "Probably," Jack admitted. "Change makes people nervous. Some will try to test it." He smiled slightly. "But they'll find this town's got steel in its spine now. Good steel, forged the right way." As the sun began to set, David gathered the Steel Serpents for a quiet conversation. Emma watched from a distance as her father spoke, his words too low to hear, but their impact visible on the men's faces. She recognized his expression, the same one he wore when teaching her life's important lessons. The market day ended with an impromptu community dinner, vendors sharing unsold food, townspeople breaking bread with former adversaries. Emma sat beside her father, watching the Steel Serpents integrate naturally into the fabric of Oakhollow life. "You're rebuilding more than just their reputation," she observed. David looked at his daughter with pride. Sometimes people just need to be reminded of who they can be, of what strength really means. He watched Max helping an elderly vendor pack up her car. "They were lost, like I was once. The farm saved me. Maybe Oakhollow can save them too." As darkness fell and the market square slowly emptied, Emma realized that Oakhollow was becoming something new. Not just a quiet farming town, but a place of transformation and second chances. And at its heart stood her father, the warrior who had found peace in farming, now helping others find their way home. The following week brought changes to Oakhollow that few could have predicted. The Steel Serpents became a constant presence in town, but not in the way anyone would have expected. They helped old Mr. Peterson repair his roof, assisted the volunteer fire department with equipment maintenance, and even began organizing a neighborhood watch program under Sheriff Morgan's guidance. Emma noticed the transformation most clearly in Max. The former gang leader now carried himself differently, the artificial swagger replaced by genuine confidence. She often caught him watching her father, studying not just what David did, but how he did it. One evening, as Emma was closing up the farm stand on their property, she overheard Max and her father talking near the barn. "The Red Devils hit Miller's Grove yesterday," Max said quietly. "Trashed their market, roughed up some vendors. They're testing boundaries, seeing which towns they can still intimidate." David continued cleaning tools with methodical precision. "And you think they'll come back here?" "No, they will," Max confirmed. "Word's spreading about what happened here, about the Steel Serpents going straight. Makes us look weak in some circles. Makes you look like a target." "Let them come," David replied, his voice carrying that quiet certainty Emma had come to recognize. "Oakhollow isn't Miller's Grove." Later that night, Emma found her father in his study, examining old maps of the area spread across his desk. She recognized the tactical assessment in his gaze, the same look he had when planning crop rotations, but sharper somehow. "You're expecting trouble," she said. It wasn't a question. David looked up, his eyes softening at the sight of his daughter. "I'm expecting an opportunity. The Red Devils are used to dealing with fear. They don't know how to handle strength that doesn't need to prove itself." "Like you taught the Serpents?" "Like I learned myself," he corrected. "After your mother died, I was angry. Wanted to solve every problem with the skills the military had given me." He traced a road on the map. "This farm, this community. They taught me there are better ways to be strong." A motorcycle's rumble approached the farm, but Emma recognized the sound of Jack's bike. Minutes later, the older veteran appeared at the study door, his face grave. "Got word from my contacts in Millbrook," he reported. "Red Devils are recruiting, building up numbers. They don't like what's happening here. Say we're upsetting the natural order." David nodded, unsurprised. Natural order is just another word for bullies getting their way. "How are our new recruits coming along?" 3 more veterans joined up yesterday," Jack said. "Good men. They've heard what we're trying to do here. Want to be part of it." Emma watched her father's slight smile. The Steel Serpents were evolving, attracting members who sought purpose rather than power. David had been coaching them in more than just community service. She'd seen him teaching hand-to-hand techniques behind the barn, but always paired with lessons about restraint and responsibility. "Dad," she said carefully, "are we building an army?" "No," David replied firmly. "We're building a community. Sometimes that means teaching people to protect it." He turned to Jack. "Double the patrols around the outlying farms. Work with Sheriff Morgan to set up emergency response plans, and start training the new members in de-escalation techniques." The next morning, Emma arrived at the town diner to find several Red Devils attempting to harass Sally, the elderly owner. Before she could react, 2 Steel Serpents appeared as if from nowhere, positioning themselves casually but unmistakably between the troublemakers and Sally. "Morning, gentlemen," one of the Serpents said pleasantly. "Coffee's great here, but only if you're planning to be civil about it." Emma recognized the technique, the same calm confidence her father used, strength implied rather than displayed. The Red Devils, expecting confrontation, seemed unsure how to handle its absence. After a tense moment, they left, their usual intimidation tactics rendered ineffective. "Your father's changing more than just us," Max said, appearing beside Emma as she watched the Red Devils ride away. "He's changing how people think about strength in these parts." Emma thought about the footlocker in their barn, about all the ways her father could have used his skills differently. "He's teaching you what he learned, isn't he? About power and responsibility." Max nodded. "Captain Collins, your father, he shows us that real strength isn't about making people fear you. It's about being someone they can trust." He looked down at his Steel Serpents vest, now worn with a different kind of pride. We were trying to be wolves, but he's teaching us to be sheepdogs. Throughout the day, Emma noticed more subtle changes. The Steel Serpents moved through town with purpose rather than menace. They kept watch without being threatening, protected without intimidating. Children who once crossed the street to avoid them now waved as they passed. That evening, as she helped her father in the fields, Emma saw David pause, his attention drawn to the distant road. Within moments, she heard what he'd already noticed. Motorcycles. Too many to be their local serpents. "Red devils?" she asked, recognizing her father's focused expression. "Reconnaissance," he confirmed. "They're watching, learning, trying to understand what's changed here." He turned to her with a gentle smile. "They don't realize that's the first step toward changing themselves." As night fell over Oakhollow, Emma stood on their porch, watching the fireflies dance over the fields. Her father's words echoed in her mind, and she understood that they were part of something larger than just their town's transformation. They were showing a different way forward, not just for the Steel Serpents, but for anyone who thought strength only came from fear. David joined her on the porch, 2 mugs of tea in hand. In the distance, they could hear the Steel Serpents patrolling, their engines now a source of comfort rather than concern for the town's residents. "The Red Devils will make their move soon," Emma said, accepting the tea. "Yes," David agreed. "And when they do, they'll find out what real strength looks like. Not in how we fight, but in who we're fighting for." The fireflies continued their dance, nature's own patrol lights in the gathering darkness, as father and daughter stood watch over their changing town. The coming storm would test them all, but Emma knew now that true strength grew best in gardens of peace, not fields of fear. The attack on Miller's general store happened just before dawn. Emma woke to the sound of urgent motorcycle engines and her father's measured footsteps in the hallway. By the time she reached the kitchen, David was already on the phone with Sheriff Morgan. "Fire's contained," he said quietly. "But they left their message clear enough." He listened for a moment. "Keep the scene secured. We'll be there soon." The morning sun hadn't yet crested the hills when they arrived at the store. The Red Devils had struck with calculated precision: broken windows, overturned shelves, and spray-painted warnings about traitors and fake bikers. The Steel Serpents were already there, helping old Joe Miller clean up, their faces grim with controlled anger. "They hit just before our patrol reached this sector," Max reported to David, his voice tight. "Knew our routes. Someone's been watching us." David surveyed the damage with the practiced eye of someone who had seen far worse. "That's lesson 1, Max. The enemy always watches before they strike." He turned to the gathered serpents. "Which means they're still watching now, waiting to see how we respond." Emma helped Mrs. Miller salvage what she could from the destroyed inventory, listening as her father gathered the Steel Serpents behind the store. His voice carried the same quiet authority she remembered from countless farming lessons, but now she recognized the tactical wisdom beneath his words. "They want us to retaliate," David explained, "to prove we're no different than they are. That's not going to happen." He looked each man in the eye. "We protect, we defend, but we don't seek revenge. That's what separates us from them." Jack spoke up from the group. "Some of the boys are having trouble with that, Cap. The Red Devils are calling us cowards, saying we've gone soft." "Soft?" David's smile held no humor. "Ask anyone who served with me. Sometimes the hardest thing is choosing not to hit back when you could." He gestured to the store. "We help the Millers rebuild. We adjust our patrol patterns. We show the town that strength isn't about destruction." Throughout the morning, Emma watched the impact of her father's words ripple through the community. As news of the attack spread, townspeople began arriving, not to gawk, but to help. The Steel Serpents worked alongside church ladies and school teachers, clearing debris and patching windows. "Your father's building an army after all," Sheriff Morgan observed to Emma as they sorted through damaged goods. "Just not the kind anyone expected." By noon, the store was functional again, its wounds bandaged if not fully healed. David stood with Max and Jack, reviewing security plans, when they heard the distinctive rumble of approaching motorcycles. The Red Devil's advance scout, a single rider, appeared at the end of the street. The scout slowed, clearly surprised by the scene before him. The Steel Serpents working peacefully alongside townspeople, the community united in recovery rather than cowering in fear. David stepped forward, his stance relaxed but ready, as the scout killed his engine. "Got a message for your boss," David said calmly. "Oakhollow isn't your battlefield. We're not your enemies. But if you force this fight, you won't be facing just the Serpents. You'll be facing the whole town." The scout's eyes darted around, taking in the scene. The united community, the purposeful presence of the transformed Steel Serpents, and the quiet confidence of the farmer everyone now knew was far more than he seemed. "Boss says you're making everyone look weak," the scout replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Says the natural order's got to be restored." "Look around." David gestured to the rebuilt store, the working community. "This is the natural order. People helping people, strength protecting, not destroying." He stepped closer, his voice carrying just far enough. "I've seen real war, son. This isn't it. Tell your boss there's another way. The Serpents found it. You can too." As the scout rode away, Emma saw something she'd never expected: respect in his backward glance. The Red Devils had come expecting to find weakness in the Steel Serpent's transformation. Instead, they'd found a different kind of strength, one that didn't need violence to prove itself. That evening, as the community gathered for an impromptu potluck in the Miller's parking lot, Emma watched her father moving through the crowd. He spoke quietly with former Steel Serpents members, now proudly helping serve food to elderly neighbors. He checked in with Sheriff Morgan about patrol adjustments. He helped Mrs. Miller balance her books, finding ways to turn the day's tragedy into tomorrow's improvement. "He's not just teaching us to protect the town," Max said, joining Emma as she observed. "He's teaching us to be part of it." "That's what he learned here," Emma replied, understanding flowing through her like the evening breeze. When he left the military, he didn't just choose farming, he chose community. As darkness fell, the Steel Serpents mounted their bikes, not to patrol but to escort elderly residents home safely. Emma saw her father watching them with quiet pride, the same look he got when seeds he'd planted finally broke through the soil. "The Red Devils will come back," she said, joining him. "In force this time." David nodded, his eyes on the horizon where the scout had disappeared. "Yes, but they'll find something they don't expect." He looked around at the lingering townspeople, the transformed Serpents, the rebuilt store. "They'll find a community that knows its own strength, and those are the hardest to defeat." The evening stars emerged above Oakhollow, watching over a town that was changing in ways no one could have predicted. The rumble of motorcycles, once a sound of menace, had become a lullaby of protection. And in the growing darkness, Emma saw the truth of her father's wisdom, that the strongest gardens grow not from fear of frost, but from faith in the coming spring. The week after the attack on Miller's store brought a deceptive calm to Oakhollow. Like the stillness before a storm, everyone could feel something brewing. David spent more time training the Steel Serpents, teaching them not just defense techniques, but the discipline that came with them. In the farmhouse kitchen one morning, Emma found her father studying a stack of papers she'd never seen before. Intelligence reports, she realized. Information about the Red Devils gathered by the Serpents' growing network of allies in neighboring towns. "They're gathering," David said without looking up, "drawing in members from other chapters, building towards something big." He finally met her eyes. "We need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "To show them what real strength looks like." He handed her one of the reports. "The Red Devils have always ruled through fear, but fear only works when people feel alone. Oakhollow isn't alone anymore." Throughout the day, Emma noticed subtle changes in the town's rhythm. The Steel Serpents moved with heightened awareness, their patrols more focused. Sheriff Morgan had deputized several of the veterans among them, giving them legal authority to protect the community. At the hardware store, she found Max helping Mrs. Chen install security cameras. The former gang leader worked with careful precision, his movements deliberate and controlled, so different from the swaggering bully who'd first roared into town. "Your father's been teaching us about strategic preparation," Max explained, adjusting a camera angle. "Said sometimes the best fights are the ones you prevent." He smiled slightly. "Never thought I'd be on this side of a security system." Emma helped him run cables, thinking about transformation. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The old life? The freedom of answering to no one?" Max was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the wires. "Freedom's a funny thing," he finally said. "Thought it meant doing whatever we wanted. Your dad showed us it really means choosing to do what's right." He connected the final cable. "Besides, protecting people feels better than scaring them ever did." That afternoon, Jack arrived at the farm with news. His network of contacts had picked up chatter. The Red Devils were planning something big for the weekend market. Their leader, furious at the Steel Serpents' transformation, wanted to make an example of Oakhollow. David gathered his core group in the barn: Max, Jack, Sheriff Morgan, and several key veterans who'd joined the Serpents. Emma watched from the doorway as her father laid out maps and plans, the farmer's calluses on his hands not hiding the military precision of his movements. "They'll expect us to be at the market," David explained. "To be reactive, defensive. That's not how this plays out." His fingers traced routes on the map. "We're going to show them what a community united looks like." As the meeting continued, Emma saw the same light of understanding dawn in each person's eyes, the realization that they were part of something larger than themselves. These men, who had once sought belonging in violence, had found it instead in protection and purpose. Later, she found her father in his study, looking at an old photograph of himself in uniform, surrounded by his Special Forces team. "You miss it sometimes, don't you?" she asked. "The clarity of that life?" David carefully returned the photo to his desk. "What I miss is the brotherhood, the sense of serving something bigger than yourself." He smiled. "But I found that again here, in an unexpected way." A motorcycle roared past the farm, one of the Serpents' scouts maintaining their vigilance. David's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, in Special Forces, we learned that the strongest unit isn't the one with the most weapons or the best fighters. It's the one where each person knows their role, trusts their teammates, and believes in their mission." He looked at his daughter. "That's what we're building here." The next few days saw Oakhollow transform. Under David's guidance, the community prepared, not in fear, but with quiet determination. The Steel Serpents coordinated with local law enforcement, setting up communication networks and response plans. Shopkeepers and farmers worked together, ensuring multiple supply lines and support systems. Emma watched her father move through it all, his farmer's hands now openly showing their warrior's skill as he taught defensive techniques to those who needed them. But more importantly, he taught them about unity, about standing together. One evening, as the sun set behind the cornfields, Emma found Max and several other Serpents practicing Tai Chi in the farm's front yard, another of her father's lessons in discipline and control. "Your dad told us something interesting today," Max said during a break. "Said the best warriors are like farmers, patient, nurturing, connected to something larger than themselves. Said we're not just protecting a town, we're tending a garden of community." Emma smiled, recognizing her father's wisdom. The seeds of strength he'd planted were growing, transforming former outlaws into guardians, turning fear into fellowship. As darkness fell, more motorcycles arrived at the farm, Serpents coming for their evening briefing. But they didn't roar in like they once would have. Their engines were quiet, respectful. They parked in ordered rows, removed their helmets, and gathered to learn from the farmer who had once been a warrior and was now something more. David stood before them, his presence drawing their attention without effort. "Tomorrow," he said simply, "we show the Red Devils what Oakhollow really is. Not through force, but through unity. Not through fear, but through strength." He looked at each face in turn. "Are you ready?" The answers came not in shouts or bravado, but in quiet nods and steady eyes. These men, once ruled by chaos, had found their center. And as the stars emerged above the farm, Emma knew that whatever came next, Oakhollow would face it not as a battlefield, but as a community defending its own. Saturday dawned with an electric tension in the air. The farmers' market opened as usual, but nothing about this morning was normal. Vendors set up their stalls with deliberate calm, while Steel Serpents members moved through the crowd with quiet vigilance. David had positioned them strategically, veterans at key points, newer members paired with experienced ones. Emma noticed how her father had arranged the market layout differently today. Stalls created clear lanes with multiple exit routes. The morning sun caught the newly installed security cameras Mrs. Chen had provided. Subtle but effective changes, preparing without panicking. "They're coming," Jack reported, arriving at their produce stand. "Got word from our spotters. At least 30 bikes heading this way, more than we expected." David continued arranging tomatoes with methodical precision. "Numbers don't win fights," he said quietly. "Purpose does." The first rumble of approaching motorcycles carried across the morning air. David straightened, catching Max's eye across the market. The former gang leader nodded, setting the prepared plan in motion. Steel Serpents members smoothly guided shoppers toward designated safe areas, while others took up their positions. The Red Devils arrived like a thunderstorm, their bikes filling the market entrance. Their leader, whom Emma now knew was called Razor Wire, cut an imposing figure as he dismounted. His leather vest displayed patches from multiple chapters, a show of the force he'd gathered. "Quite a welcome party," Razor Wire called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet market. "Heard the mighty Steel Serpents had gone soft, but look at you, playing security guards for farmers." Emma watched her father step forward, his movements unhurried. The Red Devil's leader was tall, muscled, clearly used to intimidating people by his mere presence. But next to David's quiet confidence, he seemed somehow smaller. "This is your only warning," David said, his voice calm but carrying. "Oakhollow isn't interested in your kind of trouble." Razor Wire's laugh was harsh. "Trouble? Nah, we're just here to restore the natural order. Show everyone what happens when bikers forget who they are." He gestured to Max. "Starting with traitors who turn their backs on their brothers." Max stepped forward to stand beside David, his voice steady. "We didn't turn our backs on brotherhood. We found out what it really means." The tension crackled like heat lightning. Emma saw Red Devils spreading out, trying to flank the market's defenders. But everywhere they moved, they found Steel Serpents waiting, backed by townspeople who stood their ground without flinching. "Last chance," Razor Wire growled. "Step aside. Let us remind this town how things work, and maybe we let your little farmer's market survive." David's reply was interrupted by new engines, dozens of them. Everyone turned to see motorcycles appearing from side streets surrounding the market. Emma recognized the riders, veterans groups from neighboring towns, independent bikers who'd heard about Oakhollow's transformation, even former Red Devils members who'd left the gang. "You see," David said quietly, "that's the thing about community. Word spreads. People recognize truth when they see it." Razor Wire's face darkened as he realized he was now surrounded. "You think numbers scare us? We came ready to fight." "Did you?" David stepped closer, his voice pitched for the Red Devil's leader alone. "Look around. Really look. You came to fight bikers who'd gone soft. Instead, you found a community that stands together. Found men who chose to be better than their past. Found strength that doesn't need violence to prove itself." Emma saw uncertainty ripple through the Red Devils' ranks. They'd come expecting to find weak targets, former brothers who'd lost their edge. Instead, they faced something they'd never encountered, power that grew from protection rather than intimidation. "Your choice now," David continued, still speaking quietly. "Keep pushing, see how a united community responds to threats. Or recognize, like the Serpents did, that there's a better way to be strong." A tense moment stretched like wire pulled too tight. Emma held her breath, watching the Red Devil's leader wrestle with a decision that would reshape more than just this morning. The moment broke when one of the Red Devils, a younger member, suddenly pulled off his gang patches, "I'm done," he announced, walking away from his bike. Others followed, a slow but steady stream of members choosing to step away from the confrontation. Razor Wire's face contorted with rage. "Cowards, all of you." He reached for something in his vest, but before he could act, Max and Jack were there, their movements controlled and precise just as David had taught them. The weapon, a heavy chain, clattered to the ground. "It's over," Max said firmly. "You lost the moment you thought fear was stronger than community." The remaining Red Devils, watching their leader subdued without a single punch thrown, began to back away. Some removed their patches, others simply turned their bikes around. The fearsome force that had arrived to devastate Oakhollow dissolved not through violence, but through the power of witnessing a better way. Sheriff Morgan stepped forward, his badge catching the morning sun. "I'd say it's time for you to move on. All of you." He looked at Razor Wire. "Unless you'd like to discuss that concealed weapon charge." In the end, the Red Devils' mighty show of force retreated with a whimper. Their leader, his authority shattered by the defection of his members, had no choice but to follow. The thunder of departing motorcycles grew distant and faded, leaving behind a market filled with people standing tall. David turned to the gathered community, vendors, townspeople, Steel Serpents, and their new allies. "Market's open," he said simply, and with those words, the tension dissolved into triumphant relief. As life flowed back into the market, Emma watched her father return to their produce stand, calmly straightening vegetables that had shifted during the confrontation. She understood now more than ever that true strength wasn't in the fight you won, but in the fight you prevented. The day's victory belonged not to any individual, but to a community that had learned to stand together. And in the warm morning sun, Oakhollow's market bloomed with something more precious than any vegetable or fruit, the flowering of courage that grows best in gardens tended by peace. The day after the confrontation brought a different kind of energy to Oakhollow. People walked taller, smiled more readily, greeted the Steel Serpents not just with acceptance, but with genuine warmth. The morning found Emma helping her father in their fields, watching as members of the motorcycle club arrived one by one, not for patrol or protection, but to learn about farming. "Never thought I'd trade my wrench for a hoe," Jack commented, carefully tending to a row of peppers under David's guidance. "But there's something about working the earth that settles the spirit." David moved among them, teaching cultivation the same way he'd taught combat, with patience, precision, and purpose. "Farming and protecting aren't so different," he explained. "Both require attention, dedication, and understanding that you're serving something larger than yourself." The transformation of the Steel Serpents continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Max had organized a mentorship program, pairing veteran members with troubled youth from surrounding communities. The clubhouse, once a place of intimidation, was being renovated into a community center. "Your father's vision was bigger than any of us realized," Max told Emma as they sorted through donations for the center. "He didn't just stop us from being destructive, he showed us how to be constructive." Emma watched as former Red Devils members began arriving in Oakhollow, not to cause trouble, but to seek guidance. They came quietly, individually, drawn by stories of transformation and second chances. David welcomed each one, offering the same patient strength that had changed the Steel Serpents. One such arrival was a young man named Tyler, who had been among the first to remove his Red Devils patches during the confrontation. Emma found him helping at their farm stand, his uncertain movements gradually gaining confidence under her father's quiet instruction. "I used to think strength meant making people fear you," Tyler confided as they restocked vegetables. "But watching how your dad handled everything, how the serpents changed, it showed me there's a different kind of power." The afternoon brought a surprise visit from Sheriff Morgan, who carried news that spread quickly through the town. The Red Devils were dissolving, their leadership scattered, their members either leaving the life entirely or seeking to join groups like the transformed Steel Serpents. "Your father did more than protect one town," the sheriff told Emma. "He started a movement. Other communities are reaching out, wanting to know how we did it. how we turned former troublemakers into community pillars. David took the news with characteristic humility, more concerned with the day's harvest than his growing legacy. But Emma saw how carefully he listened when Max proposed expanding their mentorship program to other towns, how thoughtfully he considered Jack's ideas for veteran outreach. As evening approached, Emma found her father in his study, adding new photos to the wall, not of military operations this time, but of the Steel Serpents working in the community. Images of Max teaching kids about motorcycle maintenance, Jack organizing a veterans support group, former rivals working together to build something positive. "You're building a different kind of army," Emma observed, studying the photos. David smiled, arranging a picture of the Serpents helping at the market. Not an army, a community, the kind that grows stronger by lifting others up, not putting them down. The sound of motorcycles approaching drew them outside, but there was no tension now. The bikes carried members of the Steel Serpents returning from their first official community outreach mission to a neighboring town. They parked with quiet discipline, their leather vests now bearing new patches, symbols of service rather than intimidation. 6 more towns want to start similar programs, Max reported, his face glowing with purpose. People are starting to see that change is possible, that strength can build instead of destroy. David nodded, surveying the gathered group. These men, who had once sought power through fear, now found it through service. The transformation went beyond their appearance or actions. It showed in their eyes, their posture, the way they carried themselves with dignity rather than menace. "Remember what I told you about gardens?" David asked the group. "How the strongest plants are those that support each other." He gestured to the flourishing fields around them. "That's what we're growing here, not just vegetables, but a network of support and strength that spreads far beyond our fields." As darkness settled over Oakhollow, the farm became a gathering place for an unusual family. Farmers and bikers, veterans and youth, all drawn together by the quiet strength of a man who had learned to turn swords into plowshares. They shared meals, swapped stories, and planned for a future that seemed brighter than any had imagined possible. Emma watched her father move through the gathering, still teaching, still guiding, but now to a much larger classroom than their small farm. The warrior-turned-farmer had found a way to cultivate peace without sacrificing strength, to nurture growth without forgetting vigilance. Under the stars, the rumble of motorcycles became a lullaby for a different kind of dream. One where strength grew from roots of compassion, where power came from lifting others up, and where a small town's transformation became a beacon for others seeking their own path to redemption. As autumn approached, the changes in Oakhollow deepened like roots taking hold in fertile soil. The Steel Serpents' transformation had become a model for other communities, drawing visitors from towns across 3 states. Emma watched her father handle the attention with the same quiet grace he brought to everything else, turning each inquiry into an opportunity to spread the message of community strength. One crisp morning, Emma arrived at the market to find a television news crew setting up near their stand. The reporter, a polished woman from the city, seemed bemused by the sight of leather-clad bikers helping elderly vendors set up their stalls. "We're not interested in publicity," David told her firmly, continuing to arrange his produce. "The story isn't about us. It's about what happens when people choose to be better than their past." But the cameras kept rolling, capturing scenes that would have seemed impossible months ago. Max teaching a group of teenagers about motorcycle maintenance and responsibility. Jack leading a veterans support group in the renovated clubhouse. Former Red Devils members working alongside townspeople to build a new playground. "Your father's created something remarkable," the reporter told Emma during a quiet moment. "These men, they're not just changing their behavior, they're changing their whole identity." Emma understood what she meant. The Steel Serpents still wore their leather vests, still rode their motorcycles, but everything else about them had evolved. Their clubhouse, once a fortress of exclusion, now hosted community meetings. Their rides, once meant to intimidate, had become charity events and emergency response exercises. That afternoon, Emma found Tyler, the former Red Devils member, teaching younger Serpents about the farm's irrigation system. His knowledge came from weeks of patient learning under David's guidance, and now he passed it on with the same careful attention. "Your dad showed me that real respect doesn't come from fear," Tyler explained as he demonstrated proper maintenance techniques. "It comes from being someone others can count on." The lesson was interrupted by the arrival of several motorcycles, more former gang members seeking guidance. David emerged from the fields to greet them, his farmer's clothes dusty from work, but his bearing unmistakably that of a leader. "We heard what happened with the Red Devils," one of the newcomers said. "Heard about how things are different here." David studied them with the same careful attention he gave to his crops. "Different isn't always easy," he warned. "Change takes work, dedication. You have to want it." "We want it," another rider spoke up. "Tired of living like outlaws. Want to be part of something better." Emma watched her father hide a smile, the same one he got when seeds first broke through the soil. "Then let's start with the basics," he said, leading them toward the fields. "You learn a lot about discipline from working with the earth." Later that evening, the farm hosted another community dinner, now a regular event that brought together the growing extended family of Oakhollow. Emma helped serve food, listening to conversations that wound between crop rotation and community patrol schedules, motorcycle maintenance, and mentorship programs. Sheriff Morgan arrived with news from his law enforcement network. "Word's spreading," he told David. "Other towns are reporting gang activity dropping as members leave to either join reformed groups like the Serpents or start their own community programs." Max, overhearing, joined the conversation. "Got calls from 3 more chapters today," he added. "They're interested in what we're doing here, how we made the transition." David considered this while helping an elderly neighbor fill her plate. "The world's hungry for this kind of change," he said finally. "People want to belong to something meaningful, something bigger than themselves. They just need to see it's possible." As night fell, Emma found herself sitting with her father on their porch, watching the fireflies compete with distant motorcycle headlights as Serpents headed out for their evening patrol. "I've been thinking about graduate school," she said carefully. "About maybe deferring for a while." David turned to her, questioning. "What's happening here?" she continued. "It's important. Historic, maybe. I want to be part of it. Help document it. Help spread it to other communities." Her father was quiet for a moment, considering. "Your mother would be proud," he said finally. "She always believed in the power of stories to change lives." The night air carried the sound of motorcycles returning. Not just patrollers, but more seekers arriving, drawn by the growing legend of Oakhollow's transformation. Emma watched her father straighten slightly, ready to welcome them, ready to show another group of lost souls the path to redemption. "You're not just growing vegetables anymore," she observed. "You're growing hope." David smiled in the darkness. "Hope's the most important crop of all," he said softly. "And like any good crop, it spreads. Seeds take root. New gardens grow." Around them, Oakhollow settled into its evening rhythm. But it was a new rhythm now, one that included the purr of motorcycles alongside the chirp of crickets, the sound of leather-clad men discussing community service alongside church ladies planning bake sales. A rhythm of transformation, of growth, of strength found in unexpected places. And at its heart, a farmer who had once been a warrior continued to tend his most important garden, not the one that grew vegetables, but the one that grew second chances. The first snow of winter dusted Oakhollow like powdered sugar on a holiday pastry. Emma watched from the farmhouse window as Steel Serpents members, now as familiar with snow plows as they were with motorcycles, cleared the town's roads with practiced efficiency. The sight of leather-clad bikers performing community service had become so normal that few even remarked on it anymore. Inside the renovated clubhouse, now officially named the Oakhollow Community Center, Max led a meeting that reflected how far things had come. Representatives from 12 different motorcycle clubs sat around tables, notebooks open, listening intently as he outlined the principles that had transformed the Steel Serpents. "It's not just about changing what you do," Max explained, his voice carrying the confidence of hard-won wisdom. It's about changing who you are, who you want to be. He gestured to David, who stood quietly at the back of the room. Captain Collins taught us that true strength grows from serving others, not dominating them. Emma, documenting the meeting for what had become her personal project, chronicling Oakhollow's transformation, noticed how the visiting bikers leaned forward when her father spoke. David's reputation had grown beyond their small town, but he wore the attention with the same humble grace he brought to farming. The principles are simple, David told the group. Respect, discipline, purpose. The hard part is living them every day, choosing them even when the old ways seem easier. After the meeting, Emma helped Jack organize the community center's new veteran support resources. The older biker had become a cornerstone of their outreach programs, his own transformation inspiring others to seek help and purpose. Got word from another Red Devils chapter in Missouri, Jack mentioned as they worked. They're voting to dissolve, reform as a community support group, 5th one this month. Through the windows, Emma could see Tyler teaching a group of younger members how to maintain their winter emergency response equipment. The former Red Devil had become one of their most dedicated instructors, his past giving him a unique ability to reach those just starting their journey to redemption. Your father's methods are spreading, Tyler told her later, as they stocked the community center's food pantry. Other towns are starting their own programs, not just dealing with motorcycle clubs, but any group that needs direction, purpose. The afternoon brought a surprise visit from Mrs. Henderson, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever. She carried a photo album that made David smile with recognition. Found these while cleaning, she said, opening the album to show photographs from decades ago. A younger David Collins in his Special Forces uniform, standing with her late husband. Thomas always said you'd do great things here, David. Said you just needed time to find your way from warrior to wisdom. Emma watched her father page through the album, understanding blooming in her mind. You knew, she said to Mrs. Henderson. All along, you knew who Dad really was. The elderly woman smiled. Oakhollow has always known how to keep the right secrets, dear, and how to help people find their true path. Later, as evening painted the snow-covered fields in purple and gold, David and Emma walked the property's perimeter. The patrol was habit now, but different from the military vigilance of his past. This was the watchfulness of a gardener, caring for growing things. I've been thinking, Emma said, her breath frosting in the cold air, about what happens next, how we make sure this change lasts. David nodded, understanding in his eyes. You're worried about what happens when I'm not here to guide them. The Serpents look to you, all these other groups coming to learn. They need your experience, your wisdom. Her father stopped, surveying the transformed community before them. The clubhouse lights glowed warmly, motorcycles parked neatly outside. In the distance, patrol bikes moved through town, their riders now trusted guardians rather than feared outlaws. Look closer, he said softly. Max doesn't just follow orders anymore. He understands the principles, lives them, teaches them. Jack's built a support network that runs itself. Tyler and the others. They're not just changing themselves, they're helping others change. Emma saw what he meant. The transformation had taken root, grown beyond any single person's influence. They've internalized it. Exactly. David smiled, pride warming his voice. Real change isn't about following a leader. It's about becoming the kind of person others can follow. Each of them is becoming that person in their own way. As if to prove his point, they heard motorcycles approaching, another group of seekers arriving, drawn by Oakhollow's growing reputation. But this time, it was Max and Tyler who went to meet them, ready to share the lessons they'd learned, the transformation they'd experienced. Inside the community center, Jack led his evening support group, his voice carrying clearly. Strength isn't about who you can dominate. It's about who you can lift up. Emma watched the scene unfold, understanding deepening like winter frost. Her father hadn't just changed a group of bikers or a small town. He'd planted seeds of transformation that would continue to grow and spread. each new garden tending itself, each transformed soul helping others transform. "The best teachers," David said quietly, watching his students become teachers themselves, "are the ones who help others find their own wisdom." The winter night settled over Oakhollow like a gentle hand, stars emerging above the snow-covered fields. In the distance, motorcycle engines purred, no longer a sound of menace, but a lullaby of protection and purpose. The garden her father had planted was flourishing, even in the depths of winter, growing strength from soil enriched by second chances and redemption. Spring returned to Oakhollow with a force that seemed to mirror the town's transformation. As fresh buds broke through thawing soil, Emma sat in her father's study, finalizing her documentation of the past year's changes. The wall of photographs had grown, telling a story that even she sometimes found hard to believe. "First national conference starts tomorrow," Max announced, entering with a stack of registration forms. The Steel Serpents clubhouse-turned-community center was hosting representatives from reformed motorcycle clubs across the country. Over 200 people coming to learn the Oakhollow way. David reviewed the papers with the same careful attention he gave to checking his spring plantings. "Remember, it's not about creating copies of what we did here. It's about helping them find their own path to change." The conference preparations had transformed the town once again. Local families had opened their homes to visitors, while the Steel Serpents organized everything from security to hospitality with military precision. Emma watched former enemies work side by side, their old rivalries forgotten in the shared purpose of spreading what they'd learned. "Got confirmed attendance from 3 more former Red Devils chapters," Jack reported, joining them with his own paperwork. "Plus that group from California, the ones who turned their club into a disaster response team." Emma had been tracking these changes for her project, watching the ripple effects spread across the country. Former outlaw clubs transforming into community support networks, veterans finding purpose in service rather than violence, troubled youth discovering mentors in unexpected places. The morning of the conference dawned clear and bright. Emma stood with her father at the entrance to the community center, watching motorcycles arrive from every direction. But these riders didn't bring tension or fear. They came seeking wisdom, carrying hope. "Never thought I'd see something like this," Tyler said, helping direct parking with the precision David had taught him. "Used to ride into towns looking to cause trouble. Now we're teaching others how to prevent it." The conference opened with a moment that caught Emma by surprise. As David stepped up to welcome the gathered crowd, Max and the other Steel Serpents leaders joined him on stage. But instead of speaking himself, David stepped back, gesturing for Max to take the lead. "A year ago," Max began, his voice steady with new confidence, "I thought strength meant making others fear you. Then a quiet farmer showed us what real power looks like." He surveyed the packed room. "But this isn't about one man's wisdom. It's about what happens when people choose to be better than their past." Throughout the day, Emma watched the seeds her father had planted bear fruit. Steel Serpents members led workshops on community engagement, conflict resolution, and veteran support. Tyler shared his journey from Red Devil to community leader. Jack conducted sessions on building support networks for troubled youth. David moved through it all quietly, no longer the central figure but a gentle presence, offering guidance when needed, but letting his students become teachers in their own right. Emma found him in the afternoon, watching from the back as Max demonstrated their community patrol protocols. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" she asked. "Teaching them to stand on their own?" Her father smiled. "The best gardens grow themselves eventually. The farmer just needs to prepare the soil, plant the right seeds." The conference's impact became clear during the evening session, as representatives from different groups shared their own transformation stories. A club from Texas had turned their mechanical skills to fixing cars for single parents. Another from Florida had become a hurricane response team. Each story different, but all growing from the same seeds of purpose and service. Late that night, after the formal sessions ended, Emma found herself at an impromptu gathering behind the community center. Bikers from across the country sat in circles, sharing experiences, building connections. The sound of motorcycles in the distance no longer carried menace. Instead, it brought the promise of help. of strength used to protect rather than intimidate. "Your father changed more than just Oakhollow," an older biker told her, his vest showing patches from 3 different reformed clubs. "He showed us there's a different kind of freedom, not from rules or responsibility, but from the weight of being what others fear." David joined them, carrying coffee for the night watch crew. Emma watched how naturally the gathered leaders included him in their circle, not as a commanding officer, but as a wise elder, a guide who had helped them find their own path. "The hardest part of change," he told the group, "is believing it's possible. But look around. Every one of you is proof that it is." He gestured to the town beyond the community center. "Oakhollow isn't special because of what we did. It's special because we showed what's possible when people choose to grow beyond their past." As midnight approached, Emma walked with her father back to their farm. The spring air carried the scent of new growth, of possibilities. Behind them, the conference continued informally, leaders from across the country building networks of support and understanding that would spread far beyond their small town. "It's like watching a garden seed itself," Emma observed. "Each transformed life planting the possibility of change in others." David nodded, his farmer's hands relaxed but still ready, the warrior's vigilance now turned to nurturing growth. "That's how real change works," he said softly. "Not from force, but from showing others what's possible, then stepping back and letting them grow their own gardens." The night wrapped around them like a gentle reminder that darkness could nurture as well as hide, that strength could protect as well as dominate, and that the most powerful transformations often started with the quietest choices to change. As summer returned to Oakhollow, the fruits of transformation were evident everywhere. The national conference had sparked a movement that continued to grow, but it was the subtle changes in daily life that moved Emma most. She captured these moments in her documentation. Steel Serpents members teaching farming techniques to troubled youth, former rivals working together on community projects, and her father's quiet pride as he watched his students become leaders. One warm morning, Emma found Max and Tyler in an intense discussion at the community center, surrounded by maps and reports from other reformed clubs across the country. "Network's growing faster than we expected," Max explained, marking another location on their expanding map. 10 more chapters requesting guidance this month alone. We're going to need more trainers." Tyler nodded, checking his tablet. "Got 3 teams ready to travel. Jack's been running them through the leadership program Captain Collins designed. They're solid." Emma watched them work, remembering the angry, lost men they'd been just a year ago. Now they moved with purpose, their old aggression transformed into focused determination to help others change. "Your father's methods are becoming a blueprint," Tyler told her, gesturing to the documentation spread across their table. "Not just for bike clubs anymore. Youth groups, veterans organizations, even some law enforcement agencies are interested in what we're doing." The afternoon brought a visit from Sheriff Morgan, who carried news that made David smile. The state was considering Oakhollow's program as a model for rehabilitation and community integration. "They're calling it the Collins method," the sheriff said, sharing the official proposal. "Using community engagement and purposeful service to transform troubled groups. They want to implement it statewide." David accepted the papers with his usual humility. As long as they understand it's not about forcing change, it's about showing people a better way to be strong. Emma found her father later in his study, adding new photographs to the wall, images of Steel Serpents members teaching in other communities, of reformed clubs doing disaster relief work, of Max speaking at a national law enforcement conference about transformation and trust. "Did you ever imagine it would spread like this?" she asked, watching him arrange the photos. "Growth follows its own path," he replied, stepping back to survey the wall. "Like plants finding light, people are hungry for purpose, for belonging. Sometimes they just need to see it's possible." The evening brought more visitors, leaders from a motorcycle club in Seattle, seeking guidance on their own transformation. But instead of meeting with David, they found themselves welcomed by Max and the other Serpents leaders. Emma watched from the porch as Max led the visitors on a tour of their operations. His confidence had evolved into something deeper than the artificial swagger of his gang days. He moved with the same quiet authority she'd always seen in her father. "They don't need me anymore," David observed, joining her on the porch. "That's how it should be." "But they still look to you," Emma pointed out. "Still seek your guidance." David smiled, watching Tyler demonstrate their community patrol protocols to the visitors. They looked to the principles, not the man. That's the real victory. As darkness settled over Oakhollow, the community gathered for their weekly dinner at the center. Emma looked around the room, seeing how naturally everyone mixed together now. Bikers and farmers, veterans and teenagers, former enemies sharing meals and stories. Jack took the floor, his voice carrying over the friendly chatter. "Got some news to share. The Veterans Support Network we started here, it's being adopted by the VA as a pilot program. They want us to help implement it nationwide." The announcement brought cheers and congratulations, but Emma watched her father's reaction. His smile carried the satisfaction of a farmer seeing seeds planted long ago finally bearing fruit. Later that night, as motorcycles purred through their evening patrol routes, Emma worked on her documentation in the farmhouse kitchen. Her father joined her, reading over her latest entries. "You're capturing more than just events," he observed. "You're recording the ripple effects of change." "It's important," Emma replied, typing steadily. "Not just what happened here, but how it happened. The way strength can transform when it's rooted in service instead of fear." David nodded, pride evident in his eyes. "Your mother would have loved this. She always said the most powerful stories were the ones that showed people a better way to live." Through the window, they could see the lights of motorcycles moving through town, not bringing terror as they once had, but comfort and protection. The Steel Serpents had become guardians rather than outlaws. Their strength turned to nurturing rather than destroying. "We're not just growing vegetables anymore," Emma said softly, echoing words from months ago. "We're growing hope, spreading it across the country." Her father's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, warrior and farmer and teacher all at once. "And hope," he reminded her, "is the crop that keeps giving, season after season, as long as there are people willing to tend it." The night settled around them like a familiar blanket, carrying the sounds of their transformed community. Motorcycles and crickets, laughter from the community center, the quiet peace of a town that had learned to turn fear into fellowship, strength into service. 1 year to the day after the Steel Serpents first roared into Oakhollow's market, Emma stood at her father's produce stand, watching the morning sun paint the transformed town in golden light. The market buzzed with its usual activity, but nothing about it was truly usual anymore. Steel Serpents members, their leather vests now bearing patches of service rather than intimidation, helped elderly vendors set up their stalls. New faces mixed with familiar ones, visitors from across the country coming to learn, reformed club members finding their way to purpose, troubled youth discovering direction in unexpected places. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Max said, joining her at the stand. He'd traded his aggressive stance for the quiet confidence Emma associated with her father. "Feels like a lifetime ago." David arrived with the morning's harvest, but he wasn't alone. A group of former Red Devils members, now part of their training program, helped unload the produce. They moved with the same disciplined precision that all of David's students seemed to acquire. The warrior's awareness turned to service rather than strife. "Got the final numbers from the national network," Jack reported, checking his tablet. 53 clubs transformed, 38 new community centers established, over 2,000 members through the rehabilitation program. He looked up with pride, all growing from what started here. Emma added these details to her documentation, which had evolved into something larger than she'd initially planned. Universities were studying their model of community transformation. Government agencies sought their guidance on rehabilitation programs, but the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture the real change. The real change was in Tyler, once a lost soul in the Red Devils, now leading a youth mentorship program. It was in the way the Steel Serpents carried themselves, their strength turned to protection rather than intimidation. It was in how Oakhollow had become not just a town, but a beacon of possibility. "Your father changed everything," Mrs. Henderson observed, selecting her weekly tomatoes, though he'd never take credit for it. "The credit belongs to those who chose to change," David said, joining them. "We just showed them it was possible." The day brought a steady stream of visitors, law enforcement officials studying their methods, representatives from other towns seeking guidance, former gang members looking for a new path. But instead of meeting with David, they found themselves welcomed by Max, Jack, Tyler, and the others who had become leaders in their own right. Emma watched her father observe it all with quiet satisfaction. He'd done more than transform a group of troubled bikers. He'd created a self-sustaining garden of change, where each reformed soul helped others find their way. As evening approached, the community gathered for a special dinner marking the anniversary. The community center, once a fortress of exclusion, now buzzed with the warmth of inclusion. Farmers and bikers, veterans and youth, all sharing meals and stories. Max took the podium, his voice carrying authority earned through service rather than fear. "A year ago, we came to this town thinking we knew what strength was. We were wrong." He looked at David with respect. "True strength isn't in making others fear you. It's in helping others find their own strength." Jack followed with updates on their expanding programs: veteran support networks, youth outreach, emergency response teams. Tyler shared stories of transformation from across the country. Each speaker had once been lost, and each had found their way to a different kind of power. Finally, David stood to address the gathering. Emma watched the room fall silent, drawn not by fear but by genuine respect. "A garden doesn't grow because of the farmer," he said simply. "It grows because each plant reaches for the light in its own way. Our job was never to force change, but to show what's possible when strength serves rather than dominates." As night settled over Oakhollow, Emma walked with her father back to their farm. The sound of motorcycles on patrol mixed with evening birdsong, no longer a discord, but a harmony of protection and peace. "Your documentation project," David said as they reached the porch. "It's important, not just recording what happened, but showing others the path." "Like you showed them," Emma replied, understanding deepening. "Not giving orders, but offering direction. Not demanding change, but nurturing it." They stood together in the growing darkness, watching motorcycle headlights trace familiar patterns through their transformed town. The garden they'd planted had grown beyond their fence lines, beyond their town borders, spreading seeds of change across the country. "Life's funny," David mused, his farmer's hands relaxed but ready, the warrior's vigilance now turned to growing hope. "Spent years in special forces thinking I was protecting something. Turns out the real mission was here all along." Emma looked at her father, farmer, warrior, teacher, guide, and saw all the roles merge into something greater. He had taken the skills of war and turned them to cultivation, transformed the power to destroy into the strength to nurture. Around them, Oakhollow settled into its evening rhythm, a town that had learned to turn fear into fellowship, strength into service. The rumble of motorcycles, once a sound of menace, had become a lullaby of protection, and in gardens across the country, seeds of transformation took root, growing toward a light that David Collins had helped them see. "The best crop," Emma said softly, echoing her father's words from long ago, "is the one that keeps giving, season after season." David smiled in the darkness, warrior and farmer and father all at once. "And the strongest gardens," he added, "are the ones that grow themselves." Above them, stars emerged like distant promises, watching over a town that had become more than just a place. It had become a possibility, a proof that strength could protect instead of threaten, that power could serve instead of dominate, that anyone could grow beyond their past if given the right soil in which to root. And in that soil, tended by a farmer who had once been a warrior, hope continued to grow season after season, spreading its seeds on the wind of change. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.